Last week we were talking about the gift of love. So today we're going to be talking about what love is not. Something that I'm probably an expert in. When I was in the car with my son Henry, we were talking about the fact that I was going to be teaching a class at the church, and he asked, or I told him what the class was about. The class was going to be about love, and he kind of smirked, and he said, "That's not something you can teach about." And you know, he doesn't understand what love is, I guess, yet. I guess I have to teach him more about that. But today's topic is what love is not, which is a perfect fit for me, according to him. But let's dive into this. First of all, we need to review what we were talking about last week. So the big idea last week was that love is a gift, right? The whole connection between Corinthians 13 and Christmas time is that Corinthians 13 is really contextualized amongst the rest of the chapters. It's really all about gifts. The church at Corinth had tremendous gifts of wealth, gifts of knowledge, spiritual gifts, the ability to speak in tongues, to prophesy. So lots of good things were happening, yet it was a church that was divided, right? They were ignoring the fundamental gift, the gift that determines the way that we exercise our gifts so that we build community and not divide ourselves, which is the gift of love. Not only was the incarnation a gift of love, but we also talked about the fact that the gift itself is love, right? That Jesus, as the Son, is the definition of love. We spent time in 1 John 4, where John says that God is love, right? Not that love is God, but that God defines love. For us to understand what love is, we have to know something about the character of God, and that He is love, and that love is defined by Him. And so it's important to know your definitions, but a great way to define love is Jesus Christ, right? If we look at His life, if we look at His words, if we look at His ministry, if we look at how He treated other people, all the time He was exemplifying love. He was the perfect example for us. And so the gift is love. And then we also wrapped up last week talking about this idea that gifts that are used without love puff us up, right? We feel big. It strokes our ego, right? When we can do something for somebody else. But if we do that without love, the direction of the gift is up. It makes us bigger. Whereas, as Sinclair Ferguson says in the book title, love came down, right? Everything about the gift of love that we receive at Christmas time was all bringing God down to our level so that we could engage Him, so that we could interact with Him, so that we could see Him in the flesh. And all of that was bringing God down. So the direction of love is down, right? We are to use our gifts to serve other people, not to serve ourselves. And so that was last week. And so today we're talking, like I said, about what love is not. And we already mentioned a couple of things. The things I'd like to focus us on today, our big idea for today, in a nutshell, is when God's love determines our identity, we are free to love others. Let me read that again. When God's love determines our identity, we are free to love others. That's the big idea for today. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about identity, right? A lot of what the church at Corinth was dealing with had to do with false identity. Am I about my gifts? Am I about what I can do for the church? Or am I about loving people? Am I about bringing myself down so that I can serve other people with my gifts? And so that's what we're going to be looking at. The first part of Corinthians 13 has a series of if statements. And I left some blanks on the back if you're a person that likes to write like I am. There's some space to fill things in as we go through. But these first three statements, probably could have done this last week because it ties in well with this idea of serving others with our love, with our gifts. But these three if statements are kind of, I don't know, they're kind of funny. And they're kind of serious, I guess, at the same time, right? They all three start with some amazing thing. something that we would all as Christians celebrate. But then by the end of the verse, it's the actual identity of the person is the opposite. The effect is the opposite of what it has. So let's start with the first one there. 1 Corinthians 13, verse 1. It says, if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, so this is a spiritual gift, right? Something that happened at Pentecost and something that is valued. Paul says it's valuable. But I have not love. I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal, right? So one interesting thing in my life, when I graduated from Geneva College back in 1999, I worked for a year in a program called Teen Challenge, which had nothing to do with biology or chemistry, which is what I had studied. I think I needed a break from that. And I didn't have a strong sense of what I was going to do practically with work, how those interests of mine were going to play out in a field. And one of the interesting things, Teen Challenge is an Assembly of God ministry. So I worked with anywhere from 5 to 12 delinquent teenagers. These were teenagers that came out of the juvenile justice system. And the whole belief behind the program is that if these kids knew Christ, their lives would be changed forever. And we can all agree with that. It was a difficult setting to work in because we were constantly trying to correct them, but also show them the love of Christ. And part of my responsibilities and my duties was that we would go to revival services. This came out of the Pentecostal tradition and the Assembly of God Church. So we would go to church services all the time. Every chance there was a church service where we could introduce the kids to worship and to hearing the gospel, we would go. And in a lot of these church services they were awesome, but there was a lot going on. There was a lot of distraction going on, in my opinion. And there was a lot of speaking in tongues. And as a young person, this was new to me. I'd grown up in a Presbyterian background. I didn't know the first thing about tongues or language or prayer speak or whatever you want to call it. And so, it was jarring for me. And I felt like I started to question my faith. Am I really a Christian? Because, this isn't something that I can do. This isn't something that is significant in my life. And I'll never forget the words of advice. My supervisor, David Burnworth, who was a Baptist, he pulled me aside and said, he had never seen speaking in tongues transform somebody's life like love has. And that's really what this verse is all about, right? Without love, speaking in tongues can be very much about you puffing yourself up. Look at me. Look what I can do. And not that that's all it is. Of course not. It's a spiritual gift. But by itself, without love, it's very self-oriented. It's you and God, and it's not something that builds up the community. So what does Paul say? You are if you speak in tongues without love. Noisy gong, clanging cymbal, right? And Sinclair Ferguson points out that in Corinth, this was a port city. And so they had lots of metalworking going on. And so that was an image that probably resonated, pun intended, with the people, right? They were familiar with the sound of banging metal all the time. Can you imagine? It was a distraction, right? Without love, it's not something that is helpful. It's not something that's beneficial. It's not something that has any significance or meaning. Let's look at the second if statement. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all the mysteries and all the knowledge, again, good things, right? Prophetic powers, the ability to teach, to see what God is doing in the present and in the future. To understand the mysteries of God, again, knowledge. And if I have all faith, again, good things, so as to remove mountains, big faith, faith that can accomplish things, faith that can do miracles, faith that is large. But if I have not love, I am, anyone know it? Nothing, right? The exact opposite of what you would expect, right? To do those things without love is to have no consequence. There's no value there in knowledge if it doesn't lead to love and to loving other people. The third statement, the if statement, if I give away all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love. Again, this is a huge sacrifice, right? This is about as selfless as you can get, right? But if I have not love, I gain nothing, right? You get nothing out of it. It was a sacrifice for nothing. Again, with all three of these statements, the core idea is that not that these things are bad, right? Actually, they're amazing things, but to do them without love at the center, without love being the identity, the reason that you're doing these things, they're not what they are. They're not what they seem to be. So that's what we're going to be thinking about today is how does our identity found in the love of Jesus, which started at Christmas time, how does that shape us? How does that free us or allow us to better love other people, the people that are around us? Let's jump right in here. So there are a lot of great devotions. It's kind of hard because there's so many good things being said. It's kind of hard to pick and choose just one thing to focus us on. But there was one devotion entitled Throw Yourself In. And if you're reading this sequentially, you may not have gotten to it yet. I think it's going to be this week. So when you get to it, it's really good. And when I read that one, I saw that devotional. The idea in that devotion was kind of fundamental to this whole discussion. And so that's what we're going to look at. And in that devotion, Sinclair Ferguson identifies two ways that you can love. Thanks, Henny. Two ways that you can love. Self-directed love and God-directed love. Self-directed love and God-directed love. And that just rang true for me because, in the time that we live in, right, we're all about the self, right? If in the absence of God, if we try to live our lives in our culture without God, then who are we? Right? There's a huge void that creates. Who are you? You have to create that for yourself, right? We're in the age of self-identity, right? Or you're identifying yourself. You're making yourself who you are. You're not letting something that has authority, not just for you, but for all humans, you're not letting that determine who you are. You're creating that for yourself. And of course, I work in the public schools, and this is something that's becoming more and more, I'm sure you're seeing it too, Andy, more and more of it's not even an issue because nobody has a problem with it, but making identifying yourself, your gender, identifying your sexuality, those are the two things that are just being promoted, really. And they're the natural consequence of living life in a void, in a vacuum, without God. Without God's love, without God's authority in our lives, then you're whoever you want to be, right? And so it's new and it's troubling for me to see as a Christian, but at the same time, it's the natural consequence of living without God. So let's think a little bit about that. Self-directed love. What does that look like? What if you are a person that is creating an identity for yourself, and hopefully that's not us, but in moments it's us, right? We all have our bad days. What does that look like? What are you doing if you're constantly trying to identify yourself? Let's start with, who are you loving? Yourself. You're loving yourself, right? So it's kind of a small world, right? You're self-directing your love back at yourself, right? Nobody loves me, I have to love myself.
So I think where this comes out, if we're getting very practical, is, like you said, gender identity and things like that, they're real issues, but think practically about ourselves. Where this comes out at Christmas time is where we start to, I don't know, I'm sure I'm the only one who does this, but you try to imagine your perfect Christmas, and then what happens? We want our kids to act a certain way. How many of you take or have taken family pictures of your children? Always angry. Always angry. Why don't you just smile like a normal person one time? Smile all the time. Like
Glad to hear that.
Right now, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's just one example. Or like Christmas morning, right? Christmas morning, in our house, can't come downstairs till mommy and daddy are ready, right? And then you gotta have the camera out, you know? And then everybody starts to get a little honest, just wanna go get our stockings open, right? It's more about me and what I want Christmas to look like, instead of giving sacrificially to my children because I love them. And that always results in more stress. And because there's more stress, it's taking the focus off of what the day is. If I focus on what I want it to be, if I'm self-loving and not loving my children, or loving my family because of Christ's love, then naturally my focus is off of Christmas and Christ's love. I think that's a very practical example that we all can identify with. But I try to define the day as I want it to be. And Christmas Eve as well, it's just as bad as Christmas Day. But if I try to define the day as what I want it to be, rather than focusing on what the day means, very easily get off kilter there.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Yeah, that's great. That's a real practical example we can all relate to, myself included. Yeah, Bill.
I think there's an element here where we direct our love at ourselves to make ourselves feel good. So
Yeah.
if we don't feel good about ourselves, then we're not really loving ourselves. And it all depends on how we see ourselves. Our love sometimes depends on how we see ourselves. And if that's not good, then we're not loving ourselves. Whereas if we're focusing on Christ and what he says is acceptable and how he views us, we would have a different perspective.
Right. Our vision of ourselves is distorted. It's not always accurate. Yeah? Good. What else? It creates kind of an urgency, doesn't it, to get the best, right? I think of like shopping, right? I mean, I've got to get the best stuff. I've got to get the best deals, right? I've got to be first in line, or, you know, if you participate in Black Friday, right? You've got to go to just the right locations to get just the right stuff. It also deals a lot with envy, right? We're looking at what other people have. There's no frame of reference. If you're in a vacuum, there's no frame of reference for what good is. So where do you look for good? You look for good things in other people, right? You look for the presents that they're buying their kids, or you look for the traditions that they're experiencing, or you look at their vacations that they participate in, right? It's very easy to see what other people are doing and saying, that's the standard. That's what I'm shooting for. Loretta.
I think we build up expectations and want people to do and be what we want them to be. Once when I was the only time I had been away, went to Colorado, my son was little, Bruce and I were just married, he's not in here so I can tell this. And I was at the airport and he was going to pick me up. So I just imagined he'd be there with flowers and I mean, it would just be such a romantic, wonderful time. Well, he wasn't even there. Oh, no! He was late and grumbling about the traffic. But for me, I was making it into what I wanted.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's good.
Don't say anything.
No,
It's not like this is recorded or
no. I think part of us having expectations for other people, right, is it makes it very easy for us to put other people down, too, right? If we feel like we're not measuring up, well, then let's just lower the bar, right? And, you know, that leads to all kinds of malicious things, gossip or character slandering, and all kinds of things that aren't love. Another thing to think about, too, is that typically these people have demands, don't they? They need to be accepted, right? It's not okay for you to have a different opinion or a different thought, right? They're very much, it's not good enough for them to identify themselves, but they also need to have that validation from everybody else as well, which is a lot to ask, right? I mean, not everybody is doing that, and not everybody thinks or feels the same way. And it also leads to anger, right? A person that's self-driven, you're not going to live up to your own expectations. It's going to lead to real disappointment, and that's going to lead to real anger and real frustration. And so this idea of the self-directed love is really one of unhappiness, and I view it really as you're locked in. You're not free, right? You're not free to think about loving somebody else. You're not free to serve somebody else unless you're also thinking about how will this benefit me, right? So it's important in order for us to love others and to use our gifts to serve others. You can't really do that unless you're first receiving the gift of love. I mean, if we think about this from God's perspective, that it's God-directed love, that he loved us so much that he sent his son into the world to be humiliated by us, just so that we could know his character, just so that we could know his love and experience his grace and his forgiveness. And when we live in that identity, when we take that on as that's where my value comes from, when we say that's why I'm worth what I'm worth, God has made the ultimate sacrifice for me, that frees you to then not live for yourself, right? You don't have those questions running in the back of your head all the time. How can I make this work best for me? You can now start to think, how can I make this work for the kingdom? How can I allow God to direct my love? How can I use my career to serve other people? How can I sacrifice my time in a way that expresses love and glorifies God? Do you see the difference? It's all about identity. It's all about who you are. Do you say who you are, or does God say who you are? And when you live under that authority, there's tremendous freedom to love other people. Yeah, good.
Back to what Bill said, like everybody, there's this huge emphasis placed on, self-care. And self-care is important, right? Take care of yourself, make sure. But there's a lack of depth. If we fail to see ourselves as God sees us, there's a lack of depth. If we see ourselves as God sees us, I'm a prince. I'm a child of the King. I have infinite worth because worth of something is defined by the price that someone would pay to have it. And the incarnation is God saying, I'm stealing my own thunder here for a minute. The incarnation is God saying, I would give anything to have you. Anything. Isn't that way better than treat yourself? I deserve this because I need this. Because I'm a good person. No, you're not. You're infinitely valuable. And when we see ourselves as God sees us, as he was willing to put himself in a manger and on a cross, think of the freedom that allows us to love others with. Not only when I see myself that way, but when I see you that way, and you that way, and you that way, and that guy out there on the street that way. The love that opens us up to is incredible. If you haven't been in the second service, or if you're going to the second service, Nate's going to talk about wonder. To me, that's something that's just awe-inspiring. That leads you to what Ben's talking about, which is true love. Not self-defined love, but love as love truly is. Love from the Father toward us.
Great. Well said, Andy. Let me read from Sinclair Ferguson's devotion on page 69 here. This is a quote, but I think it goes right along with what Andy's comment was. Oh, I guess I have it right here. He says, the Son of God, who is the very image of God, was sent by God and came in love to restore his image. Through faith in him, we discover that our lives fit into the cosmic scheme of things. He recreates in us a love for himself and restores us to fellowship with himself, which transforms self-directed love into love of our neighbors. That is the destiny for which we were created. This is that whole idea in 2 Corinthians, of having a new identity, right? That we're a new creation, that we are born again. All of that happens when we realize the love and the sacrifice that we've received. I use the word received because, again, that's another gift term, isn't it? In order to have a gift, you have to receive a gift, right? Receiving a gift is fundamental to the whole process, right? In order for a gift to be able to shape you and to be able to change you, and in order to be able to free you to love others, you have to receive it. And this is the kind of gift that, as you all know, you don't receive once and then never think about it again, right? It's a gift that you open up every day, right? You open this gift up and remind yourself on a daily basis who you are, who God says you are. And that, again, allows you to live as a new creation and to be changed and to affect other people for love. So Jesus is our example, right? If we think about Jesus, he is the Son of God. And as a human being on earth, he received love from God the Father, just like we are to receive love from God the Father. And that love allowed him to do incredibly humiliating things, like Andy mentioned. It allowed him to suffer for us. If he was a self-directed person, right, if he was saying that it's all about me, right, he would have come down and demanded everybody to immediately fall down on their knees and worship him. But that's exactly what he didn't do, right? He didn't lift himself up, well, on a tree, but he brought himself down, right? He served us. He came to us so that he could show that love. And that love is the same gift that he was receiving from the Father. That's the same gift that we're being offered as well, right? That love that freed Jesus to set aside what he deserved, what he rightfully deserved. He set all that aside when he came to earth as a baby, when he lived in an imperfect family and grew up in a carpenter's family, and where he lived his life constantly being misunderstood, and ultimately was wrongfully tried and convicted and killed. All of that was a sacrifice that he was able to do because he was receiving that gift of love. Philippians 2, 1 through 8, I just want to read verse 5. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, which is the incarnation. So if we have this, if we understand this is the framework for how we are going to be able to love other people, it's good to think about what love is not. And that's really what the title of this class is all about. Paul actually spends more time talking about what love isn't than what he is, or what it is. And that's probably because he knew his audience. He knew that those were sinful people and there were specific things that needed to be addressed. But these are universal sins that we continue to struggle with even in our day and age. And so he identifies 8 things that are not love. And so that's what we're going to spend the rest of our time here looking at. This is the second table on the back of the handout, and there's space to look at each of these. But all of these are basically love problems, right? These are, all 8 of these things are not compatible with love, right? If you are envying somebody else, you are not loving, right? They're opposites, right? There's no room for envy if we're talking about the love that God offers us. There's no room for boasting if we are loving other people. There's no room for arrogance if we're receiving God's love. And so really all of these come back to a problem as it relates to love. And so that's what we're going to think about for each of these is what is the problem as it relates to love? And then what's the antidote? The antidote is easy. It's Jesus, right? But what do we need to focus our love on? How do we need to make sure that we're adjusting our love and correcting ourselves so that we can love the way that Jesus loved us? So the first one's envy, right? This is something that is prevalent, right? Social media makes it very easy now to envy other people. We put our best out there and we let everybody envy, right? So what's the issue with love as it relates to envy? What are we loving when we envy somebody else? Stuff, okay? We're loving stuff, material stuff, or maybe experiences. Status.
It's ingratitude.
Okay?
It's a lack of gratitude.
A lack of gratitude.
Where God has placed you.
Right. And what does it do to the gifts that you have received? You're not, as Andy says, you're not thankful for those, right? You're not loving the person that gave you all these gifts, right? So really, envy is all about loving other people's gifts more than loving the gifts that you have received, right? It's focus. It's a focus issue, right? It's focusing on what other people have and saying, I want that. I love that. And at the same time, in doing that, not appreciating the loves that you've received, the gifts that you have received. So the antidote is to love your own gifts, right? Recognize your own gifts. Maybe that's the first step, right? What do I have that I can be thankful for? So much. But love what you've got and give it to God, right? Be thankful to God because of it. How about boasting? What's the love problem when we boast? What are we loving incorrectly when we boast? Say again? Accomplishments. Yeah.
It's a little bit of the opposite of envy.
Right.
You're loving yourself too much.
Exactly. Yeah, so you can think of it as boasting is about your accomplishments. It's all about loving yourself too much, right? Elevating yourself so that other people will envy you, right? And we do this all the time as well, right? We only put our best family pictures up on Facebook, right? We only put our best foot forward, right? We always want to be at that Christmas party, and even if we're fighting in the car, once we get to the front door, everybody's happy, right? Right.
I didn't do that last night.
Good. But we have to be, in order to love in this kind of, in order to not love our appearance, we have to be humble. And the only way we can be humble, that's our antidote, the only way we can be humble is to look at how God loves us, right? When we're focused on how God loves us, we're receiving an identity that He has given to us, right? We don't need to puff ourselves up. We don't need people to know what's great about us. It allows us to be free from that. We don't have to seek that affection or to seek that attention. What about arrogance? Love is not arrogant. What's the problem there as it relates to love? How is arrogance not love?
Self-focused again, because you're proud of your own. You're better than that person. What you did is better. How you act is better. So again, it's self-focused.
Right. It's self-focused, and it's just that it's relative to other people, right? They're the standard, not God is the standard, right? If God's really the standard, we're all a mess. But when we look to other people, I'm better, I'm doing better than they are, right? We also do that in social media, don't we? Oh, they went there, but I've already been there, right? It's not that great, right? So I know better. Yeah. Somebody had their hand in the back. Yeah, Bruce.
I was just going to say it shows a lack of sympathy or empathy.
Yeah, a lack of sympathy, a lack of empathy or compassion, right? It's all a race, and I'm winning, right? Is the idea, Rocket?
It kind of shows a lack of need for God.
Yeah.
Like, I'm in. I
Right.
got it.
Yeah.
I don't need anything else.
Exactly. Yeah. It's an inaccurate picture, like we talked about before, about not seeing ourselves clearly, right? It's an inaccurate way of viewing ourselves. Like, I've already arrived. I'm here. Good. Anything else as it relates to arrogance? And so what's the antidote to arrogance? No. What is it, Dave? Humility. Again, humility. I think we can also look at specific sins from our past, right? There's value to not living in that reality either. That creates other problems, but realizing, that I'm a sinner in need of a Savior, right? That I have no hope apart from Him. That He is God and I am not. These are things that we should say to ourselves when we're feeling like we're all that, right? Rudeness. This is an interesting one. Rudeness. Love is never rude. What do we think there? What's the love issue as it relates to rudeness? Yeah, Michelle.
Like a lack of understanding or care, compassion for the person I'm being rude to.
Yeah.
What do they have going on that might
Right.
need to be more sensitive to?
Right. It brings other people down. Right. It's not correctly giving them the value and the love that God showed for them as well. Right. Yeah, Jen.
If you subscribe to the love and respect view of love, being rude is disrespectful. Right?
Yeah.
And that's the opposite of loving.
Right. Right. Being disrespectful is the opposite of loving. Yeah. Anything else about rudeness? Yeah, Michelle.
I also think I'm thinking of my own, like I'm not seeing that person as someone made in God's image.
Right. Yeah.
They really are. I'm being rude to them.
Right. We're not seeing the other person as made in God's image, right? We're valued incredibly, but they're valued incredibly. Right. And so what's the antidote there? Right? I guess Michelle kind of hit it on the head there, right? We have to see people as God sees them, as incredibly valuable things. Not things, that doesn't sound right. But as incredibly valuable beings, yeah. Beings that deserve respect, right? It's easy to be rude this time of year, isn't it? Because we all have our agendas, right? We have things that we are trying to accomplish. And if people get in the way, look out, right? There's going to be some rudeness. Yeah, Jess?
Also, for an antidote is just slowing down. Because rudeness has a quickness to it, like what Michelle's saying. So it's really slowing down, taking time, whether it's traffic or someone in a line or whatever it is. It's just
Yeah.
take a minute. You're not supposed to be so rushy.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so pace, right? The pace of our lives can sometimes lead us to be rude. Let's skip the next one, because I think what Jess is also talking about is love is not irritable, right? Irritable. First of all, when we say irritable, easily angered, right, or quick to anger. Anger isn't necessarily a sin, right? At times Jesus was angry, righteously angry, but he was always slow to anger, right? And so what's the issue with irritability? How is that not loving or never loving? Yeah, Matthew.
I just said slow to anger, that's how God defines himself.
Yeah.
Slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. So as far as we're impatient and easily angry,
Yeah.
we're behind that image we're supposed to.
Right. Yep. So God sets the standard, right? God has authority to tell us how anger should be used or how anger should be arrived at. And God's standard is be slow to anger and quick to love, right? Steadfast love.
It's a lack of trust, irritability. I think if we're in an irritable mood, it's often because we're valuing tasks over, the time spent with people or the importance of people. And when you have stress, often that's a manifestation of a lack of trust in God's plan, which I never want to hear when I'm actually stressed, but
Right.
it's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and I'm very guilty of this. My wife can tell you that sometimes if I have a busy day, she calls it I'm still in work mode, right? When I'm at work, I've got a list of 20 things that I need to get done before I can leave. I'm rattling through them, and then sometimes it's hard to come home and transition to loving people, you know. she's not an item on my agenda. She's a person to listen to. She's a person to love, and that requires me to slow down and to let God set the agenda. Yeah. The one we skipped, insist on its own way. We'll go back to that one now. And that's really the devotion that I cherry-picked for that idea of identity, right? The problem with that is that we are focused on ourselves. We're putting ourselves above other people and really even above God, right? If we're insisting on our own way, it has to be my way, right? That's not loving, right? That's the exact opposite of loving. And of course, the antidote that we mentioned before is that we're a new creation in Christ, right? We're born again. We have a new identity, the identity that he gives us, so that now we're able to put other people's way ahead of ours, right? And the last one, resentful. Resentful. Yeah, good.
I think being resentful is it's a lack of forgiveness.
Yep.
And it's easy to cling to something, even if somebody did truly wrong you.
Mm-hmm.
You can cling to that and focus on it because that takes away your need to focus on
Forgive.
how you've wronged others
Yeah.
and how you've wronged God.
Yeah.
So it just directs your focus onto someone else's sin instead of having to
Right.
think about your own.
Great. Yep. It allows us to focus on what other people have done to us and kind of allows us to turn a blind eye to the damage that we've done, the sin that we've done to other people. Christy?
I think this kind of also builds on rudeness and irritability. Those are kind of like not giving mercy or forgiveness in the moment when somebody gets
Mm-hmm.
wrong. Resentfulness is more holding on to that or
Right.
allowing that to continue.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's all kind of that lack of forgiveness and
Right.
mercy for others.
Yeah. Sinclair Ferguson talks about the use of the word charity, right? Be charitable. When somebody wrongs you, don't assume that you know the motives, right? We oftentimes will say, I know why they did that, when it may have been just an accident, right? Maybe they, if we're waiting in a line, maybe they didn't realize that, the end of the line is back behind me, right? So, oftentimes we jump to conclusions, right? We fill in the blanks that we shouldn't fill in the blanks. We don't know the motives. We're imperfect and we make mistakes, and we should be quick to forgive others. And so the antidote is to forgive, right? To forgive, right? And we can only do that really well when we realize how much we have been forgiven. Go ahead.
Listening to the list of what love is not, talking in terms of how we relate or treat other people. And to me, I'm looking at this, it's really how we're treating God.
Yeah.
Because these are displays of what we do with other people, but it's showing how we don't love God.
Right.
Because if we envy somebody, we don't love God in the gift of God. And
Yeah.
if we boast, we're disrespecting Him.
Mm-hmm.
We're putting ourselves up. So all of them, I know we're all saying in terms of how we relate to people, but
Right.
it's how, to me, it's how we relate to God.
Right. Right.
It's a new thing for me. It's
Mm.
this other Bible study. Think about what we're doing, and it's in the same class. It's more about how we disrespect God.
Yeah, right. And I think to add on to that, when God's directing our love, it's love back to God, right? So, God is an eternal triune being, right? So Andy's going to talk about love. Love is an action, and it's a verb. You have to have an object to love, or not an object, again, I keep using this, but a being to love, right? And so the community of that Trinity means that the love that God was giving to the Son, Jesus, is the same love that we're getting and receiving, and that the love that Jesus showed in obedience to God the Father was love that glorified God as well. And so, yeah, exactly what you said. When we are loving people around us, it's really us glorifying God. And when we're not, it's really us disrespecting and degrading what God has created for us. Michelle.
I think, and we realize too that any love we're doing is only because of God. And
Yeah.
And it's a reflection.
Right.
We're reflecting that. Like you said, too, is what, and like Linda said, it's all about our relationship with Him.
Right.
But when we realize any of this won't happen unless He's working in us over.
Right. Right. The only way that we're able to love is because we've first received that love. Yeah. Right. And that when we live in that reality, when we allow His authority and His love to be the thing that motivates what we do, we're glorifying God and we're loving Him. This will be our last comment. Good.
I just think to add on to that.
Yeah.
That we are created in need for our Creator.
Yeah.
So when we seek to fill that need with like self-identity, self-love,
Mm.
then this is the root.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Good point. Right. Yeah. So the fruit of self-identifying is these things, right? Envy, boasting, and they trap you, right? It's bad fruit. It's fruit that poisons you. Whereas the fruit of the Spirit living in us is love and joy and all those other fruits that our kids sing about. Yeah. Good. Okay. We're out of time. So again, big idea. I'd like to always revisit where we started. When God's love determines our identity, we are free to love others. And maybe we could add on to that, and that loves God. That's God-directed love. Let's close in prayer.